Hello everyone. I want to take just a little bit of time to talk about the curriculum design project. There have been some questions, and so I decided there were some areas that needed some clarification or maybe a little bit more information about the content was necessary. You can see in the description here of the project that the intention is for you to integrate what you've learned about with curriculum design and think about planning for your group of children. You're going to base that on your own philosophy, your belief system with every decision you make. And so even if you've done curriculum planning before or lesson planning before, which many of you have in your work or in other classes, that I want you to really think about what you're bringing to the decision-making process. Make this your own. Be creative and think about what it is you would want to happen in your classroom or the classroom that you desire to have or what you want to change your current classroom to be. So make sure that you adapt things to make it true to yourself. You will use early learning guidelines or state academic standards, to help you in your project. But this is for you to really exercise those design muscles. Obviously, you've already worked on selecting your program, the age group that you're interested in, and you made that decision already. I gave some suggestions on the handout, but you can modify the times as you prefer, which you will need to do for the schedule component of the assignment. You've already been involved with designing your philosophy statement, and this is a time where you may want to revisit that and think about how you would write it or transfer it into a program philosophy. You really want to make sure you address all the really key areas. This little brief one that I located as an example has a lot of information in it, so it can be fairly concise when you're going to think about a philosophy statement that is for a program that you want to communicate to the different stakeholders who will be looking at the program or evaluating the program, either to put their child in there or looking at evaluating it from a institutional perspective. You've already worked on your program goals, those long-range goals that will describe what it is that you want children to gain in your program. By the end of the time that they are with you, what is it that you want them to be able to do or to know or to actually have a positive attitude for? Because it can represent knowledge, content, or skills, as well as dispositions and values or attitudes. So I chose some examples from the Honey Bear Preschool and Child Care Center site. It was one that I found that had a variety of goal statements. And one was to become creative, independent thinkers. So you're really thinking about a long-range skill, a personal skill that you would help the children develop. And then they talk about the understanding of a diverse, multicultural global community. And so that's really looking at diversity. And that has to do with attitude and probably some, content knowledge about differences too. And then there was one on higher moral reasoning, helping them to develop with an internal code of ethics and principle. That definitely is a value expressed by the program that this is something they want them to do. They want them to have it. You could talk about it as a skill, but it's really looking at a value and attitude that you want them to have. So again, program goals can reflect all those different ways of doing that. And it might be interesting to look at your own program goals to see how you represented the sample that you have. You don't have to change them, but just a way, again, reflecting, does this really match my beliefs and philosophy in the decision making that I made? And like I said, you can revise anything that you want to. I'll go back and give you some feedback about these sections, and but feel free to make some adjustments if you want to do that, given some of the information that I'm going over today. The next area we'll look at is curricular strands. Curricular strands are those areas that are aspects that you're going to revisit over the time that the children are in the program, over a long period of time, probably the whole year or a particular age of child that you're going to spend with you, either a 9-month period or a 12-month period. So a strand I like to think about in terms of one of those rag rugs where it runs from one end to another and then you have cross, strands that go across. And that's what makes the program strong. That is what makes the rug strong. It's something that is connected and goes all the way through. It can certainly represent many different kinds of focus. One of the areas it could be content driven. It could be something like the concept of colors. Colors is not something we just do in a unit. It's not something we do in a single activity. It's something that we revisit over time, and it might be expanded upon where you're talking about tertiary colors or tints and hues and other kinds of things, not just, 8 or 10, basic colors that you want them to memorize, but what is the context and what do they notice? And it's something you revisit because you're going to point it out in the conversations. You're going to reflect it in terms of maybe reading books or pointing things out that then the children note, or the way that they classify objects with colors. So it's something that you go back to and reinforce over time. Similarly, it could be numbers. It could be a particular aspect of the learning environment where you're going to emphasize environmental awareness or nature study or outdoor kinds of things. That could be an emphasis that you're going to revisit and constantly think about that with the activities you plan or the way that you plan the environment. The other areas that could be involved are skills, and it could be those areas like creativity or independence that are personal skills that we reflected also in the goal statements. And yes, goal statements and the strands that come out of those are definitely something that tie together. The goals are what you want at the end, and so in order to get that, you're going to have to revisit that and build that over time with the experience that they have. And strands that you're going to help organize your curriculum and make decisions about maybe one way of doing that. So again, it could be looking at independence. It could be looking at communication skills, like the example on the right, that communication, and really emphasizing that overarchingly in all your subjects and different ways of thinking about that. We think about Reggio Emilia, the 100 languages of children, in terms of how they represent information. So that would be an important aspect, and communicating through art for Reggio Emilia. So again, looking at your models that you really connect to, looking at your beliefs and your philosophy. The one on the left is from a particular curriculum that is in New Zealand. It was established to be respectful of their native population, and so those keys of empowerment, holistic development, family, community relationships, those are really key in that culture. And so their organizational strands, they go through and how they establish their goals and what it is they're studying really create, what it is they want to approach. So that is a particular aspect of strands. They are something you revisit over time. They could be content, they could be skills, and they could be other strategies as well, like children's literature. When my daughter was in first grade, then her teacher organized every month an author illustrator study. And so they would read books by that author and author illustrator, or, study the illustrator specifically. They would read the books for their leisure reading. They would be in their reading corner. She made a display and a bulletin board about that, about the author or illustrator and characteristics about that person. And so that really was a strand that she chose to use. She also had book bags that she sent home that the children took turns with. So children's literature was a really important piece that she revisited, and it affected how she organized her curriculum. Another one might be diversity, and I think that's a really clear one where you think about diversity would be respected in my classroom, and so it's going to also look at my environment and how I'm representing the children and their families and the diversity, cultural, racial, ethnic diversity, but also ability. So I'm constantly going to think about the activities that I plan, focus on differentiation, focus on different kinds of learning strategies, multiple intelligences, all different ways of looking at diversity, but that might be something that you use, that you really revisit over time, and it affects your planning. So that would be the focus of a curricular strand. Here we'll be talking about the unit topics or themes, or you might consider it to be the project topic if you're going to follow a project approach, but that's reflective of your beliefs and your strategies. So you're going to brainstorm 8 to 10 unit topics or themes that would fit that framework, that belief systems, how you would approach it. And you need to apply strict evaluative criteria to those. You need to think about, is it meaningful? Will it be of interest to the children? Can they relate to it? Are there resources available for me to teach this that are going to allow for hands-on engagement, connection with primary materials, real materials and real resources and locations to go to. And you're going to select 2 of the themes from your list and write a paragraph that describes how each of them meet those kinds of criteria, why you selected them, why do you think they're valuable, why are they meaningful, relevant, will attract children's interest, could be extended over time if you're interested in a project approach. I specifically chose the visual on the right-hand side because I am not certain that all of them are probably valuable unit topics or themes. When I look at the gingerbread man, that's a pretty narrow scope on that one. Could come out of student interest, could necessarily be expanded, but I look at that and think, how is that relevant? How is it meaningful? What kind of resources? Can it be stretched throughout the curriculum so I can integrate it across my subjects or my developmental areas? Similarly with pirates, could be. Although I've seen a pirate topic done in project approach because it was based on children's interests. So some of those can come out of those and will be meaningful and relevant and evolve, and the time that's spent on them will usually be related to the amount of interest that continues. So you really want to think about what is valuable, what is meaningful, what is important information for them to learn, what are important skills they can gain from the areas of the themes or the unit topics. So here I chose an image that I think is helpful to think both about strands and about themes in a sense. Hopefully tie some of these things together. So this is a kindergarten at a glance. And so I chose it to look at how the organizational structure was different because look, we have physical skills, we have early numeracy, literacy, we have social responsibility, personal social responsibility. So those kind of reflect a developmental approach, but they're done in a little bit different manner, a little bit different intention. And then you see areas like citizenship and identity, environment and community awareness. Those particular areas really seem like they focus maybe on particular strands that would run through the curriculum, something that's important. I noticed that there was one stated that I'm unique, and so you see the arrow on the right points to that. Talking about valuing characteristics, interests, gifts of others, that really to me relates to what I was talking about with diversity, but here they're referring to it as citizenship and identity. Looking at the environmental and community awareness, so that is establishing an attitude toward understanding the materials around, valuing them, connection to community. Again, really feels a lot like a strand that would go through the program. Another potential strand would be the information and communication technology that you see down at the bottom. So if technology is going to be central in what you're planning and the experiences that you want to give the children, that might be a particular strand as well. So here in this image, you see a selection about what the framework is, what are the important areas of focus, and then they did particular definitions and descriptions of them. So I just thought it was also had a lot of good information that you might want to save or have also to think about for planning in the future. So here we're talking about the framework that leads then to the activity brainstorming and levels of content. So you've done a little bit of this work before if you were in the previous class, but let's revisit it. So a curriculum framework is typically a web, some sort of a graphic organizer, and you use that to really reflect the way you want to organize your curriculum. Is it going to be a developmental approach? Is it going to be subject matter approach or some combination? So we're going to revisit that with a couple of images on the next slides. So in this case, you're going to design that, create your graphic organizer, your web, and list those areas in there. And then you're going to write a paragraph, just a short paragraph, to describe that framework and why you selected it and why you have the subjects or development areas or whatever approach you may have used. You could consider using a thematic approach. That would also be an option, but generally with a theme that, and you focus on the concepts that are related to that, it would look much different, and you still need to embed those early learning guidelines or those standards of practice for K-12, depending on who you're planning for. When you do your brainstorming and identify that web and list the activities, so you're just listing activities under those areas, then you're going to identify those levels of content, and you're going to label them with an I for impressional, F foundational, and S for skill. Impressional is where you just grab their attention, you give them exposure, and you just expect them to have some awareness. Foundational is where you may expect there to be some vocabulary, some particular constructs or concepts that you want them to understand. And skilled would be really being able to give definitions and take those vocabulary or those concepts and apply them to other areas of understanding and explain them in their own terms. Or add a particular skill, whether it's in handwriting or establishing ways of telling stories. So it would be a skilled expectation in that area. So let's look at some examples. So here are a couple of examples. The one on the left really reflects the early learning guidelines in those particular domains and aligns with those. And that would be one particular approach. You can see that it blends a little bit of a subject matter with science and math and probably the language and literacy, but adds in the physical well-being and social and emotional that is more strictly viewed as developmental. And then embeds that approaches to learning that we talked about earlier and the creative arts. The one on the right was really interesting when I was looking for some visuals, and this one is very different. It is organized more about the important activities that the teacher might want to organize in the classroom, might want to embed in every single theme that is planned in the classroom. So if this would match your particular philosophy and belief system, you could come up with your own framework that would be respective of that, that is not particularly subject matter or developmental or even thematic critically. So here I put together just a little bit to explain more about the levels of content. So I chose ocean. I chose it because the visuals seemed like it was very helpful to make the points here. So we'll pretend that we live in California and ocean would be a meaningful, relevant topic. So in the physical area, then I said my activity might be ocean creature obstacle course, and it would involve a crab walk, an octopus crawl where the children would join together at the elbows back to back and pretend to be the octopus to go over a distance, fish swimming where they would pretend to do that whether they were on the ground or whether they were standing and doing it. And at that level it would be foundational because I would want them to understand that the creatures that are in the ocean or near the ocean move differently. And so I would want them to have that basic understanding. Would I want them to have a high level of understanding or of a hierarchy or predators and prey and those kinds of things? No. But the foundation of just the different creatures that are in or near the ocean move in different ways. As far as maybe a math activity, doing a number match fishing game where you would have the fishing poles with the magnets and fish with some numerals on them and then some dice. And they would roll the dice and then fish for the particular fish that would have the matching numeral. So that's a skilled area because they have to be able to count the numbers on the dice, understand that that is the cardinal number, that is the number quantity they were looking for, and then match the numeral. So that would be a high level skill. So that's the way you would identify. You would just use the letters, but I wrote them out so it was very clear of what you might do. And the particular way that this one is organized is also worth noting because it includes the music and movement, it includes books and rhymes, creative expression, and then really looks developmental with physical and social, emotional, and cognitive. Now, there's two cognitive areas. And if you look closely, the one at the top is actually language. And sometimes you will find that language is listed underneath cognitive skills. Not a particular approach that I usually follow, but that is why there's two cognitive areas in this example. The next area of decision making you will do will be your schedule. So starting from your choice of program, whether it's a half-day program, a full-day program, what the age of the children are, kindergarten or preschool. I assume probably a lot of people are going to choose preschool because it's relevant to what we're studying and also many of your positions. So you'll look at a one-day schedule and you're going to think about how it would look. You did an evaluation of schedule earlier, so this helps you kind of go back to that and think about what would be a quality schedule. So you'll put together your schedule and then you're going to annotate it, which simply means write some brief notes on it. So when you set up the titles and the time frame of your schedule, you're simply going to write what is happening during that time. What are the children doing? Is it teacher led? Just a couple of sentences, all you're really looking for. I actually used this to share with my families so that they knew not just a schedule with names that they might not understand, whether it's center time or work time in Montessori or plan do review time in high scope, that they really understand what's happening and what their child is doing during that time. So now we're going to start talking about the unit plan. And first you're going to just put the organizational features in place. And that would be to create your cover sheet, your title, include some photograph, clip art, something that represents the unit, name the course and semester. So this will create the unit plan in a nice section of this assignment that might be something that you can upload to electronic portfolio down the line. Then you're going to look at the overview section. So now this is descriptive. Your title is going to also be there. Make sure you do page numbers. And then you're going to just describe in a general statement your big idea for the unit. And use those labels on there. Use big idea. And state why you're having them study it. What is it you want them to be able to know and do by the end? Not written as goal or objective statements yet, but just what the overarching big idea is. So in this case, like I said, I'm talking about the nature study. And so my intention for the study is to get the children familiar with all the characteristics of nature in the outdoor environment. I believe that it's valuable for them to study and it has great content opportunities, but I really overarchingly want them to have time outside and time to identify all different aspects of nature. And then you indicate the planned weeks or days that you anticipate this happening. If you're using a project approach, then that's going to be very flexible, but you can come up with an estimate here. Then you're going to look at your particular subject or developmental areas based upon what you did for your curriculum framework. You're going to list those areas that you're going to use and that you're going to plan in the activities in the unit that you're going to reflect. So you will then write the learning outcomes that will match those areas that you're choosing. So designing the areas, and then you're going to just list those and then write the outcomes for your unit. What is it following the unit instruction you want the children to be able to do? It might, or tell. Identify, draw, describe, use those action terms. This is, again, the outcomes for the end of the unit. Now you're just going to talk about instructional materials in the next sections, which include what are the materials that you might need to teach this particular unit, what kinds of things you might change or add to your learning environment. Then you're going to list some children's books related to that topic, highlight those that are specifically those that you're going to use in the unit activities that are going to come later. So depending on your planning style, some of you might like to work with your activity ideas first and then go back and write the overarching outcomes and materials list and books and those kinds of things. Up to you, however that flows in terms of whether you're a inductive or a deductive thinker, basically, in your approach. And then you'll also list with links videos that you might use for the topic, like song videos, videos about content, virtual field trips, things that might be relevant, whatever those might be. You'll probably have something in there, but it doesn't have to be extensive unless that matches your particular style. Maybe you're focused on integrating technology. Then you're going to talk about learning centers. These are not going to be detailed plans. You're simply going to list 3 or 4 different types of materials or adjustments and focus that you can make in those centers. So you're just briefly going to put like reading, writing area, and then what you might put in that particular center that would reflect the theme that you've selected that you're going to do for your unit. And so you'll do something on each one of those listed. Again, just a brief sentence or two about the types of materials or adjustments you can make. Some will be more extensive depending on whether your unit has a science focus. Some of them may be more limited in terms of block area. If I'm doing nature outside, it might be a little bit less variable in that. You can see some of the things that I identified in my visuals, like putting camping, for example, related to the housekeeping area was an interesting way of thinking about housekeeping, and I didn't include that one on the list, but feel free if you want to do that. The sensory table, I have some water and rocks and things for them to use inside. And then the leaf game idea was, a way of using nature materials in a way that you can connect it to math. You can do other kinds of sorting and things that would also classification. They're also mathematical skills. But just brainstorming through and thinking of what adjustments you might make that are relevant. Again, not a detailed plan, just a sentence or two describing the kinds of adjustments that you might make. So now for your unit, you will create a KWL or question web. And this is an activity that many of you did in the fall course too. Remember, you're trying to integrate everything together. Think about the decision-making process as you're going through this. Is this consistent? What am I doing? How am I approaching this? Does this match my philosophy, the goals of my program? Just revisit that constantly as you go through. So you may do a KWL chart, a KWHL chart, and in that case you would just put examples that you can make up, or if you have children you want to brainstorm with, you can do that as well. What do they know, or what do they think they know? What do they want to know, or what do they wonder? And leave the L, what did you learn part, separate. You can add, if you want to do a KWHL chart, which is the how they might want to use the strategies. I also saw a new one that was KWLR. So it had the R on there, which was resources, very similar to the how. How would we find out? The one on the right is an example of a question web, where again, you kind of looked at what is it that we already know or that we think we know, because I say think we know because some of the information might actually be incorrect, but we're still going to write it down, and that's what they know at that particular time. And then on the what do you want to know, they use the question format here. So there's questions on the others as well. It just depends on how you define that. Sometimes the what do you know is also just a list. So there's referred to as question webs or question charts or KWLs. So in one of those strategies, you'll put that together related to your unit topic. You're going to write just a very short sample of a parent letter or family letter where you're going to tell them about the project or theme. And I think this is really important so they understand, again, why are we studying this? What do we want to accomplish? It helps them know how to talk to their child about it rather than just a list. If I just wrote nature study, so I really had to look for a visual that somewhat addressed this. So the one that I chose actually has a little section on bats. And so they're talking about, do you know bats have thumbs? This week we learned about them. This is what we've learned. Or you can do it in advance. So then they talk about, in Greek, children's are learning days of the week. In this school, they're learning Greek. What are they learning? And so they're telling about what they're learning. So that's what I really want you to think about, not just a list of topics, not just a calendar of reminders, just a section that talks about this is our theme, this is what we'd like you to know about we're studying, this is a way maybe you can engage with your child about the topics that we're studying, like with a nature study. Here's an activity maybe you could do or understand. So it's really communicating with them rather than just listing. So I want you to do that more extensively about the unit topic. Then you're going to do 2 sample activity plans using the format provided. It tweaks a little bit the CSM lesson plan that people have used before. It's simplified it a bit, and I was happy with this. It was something I ran across and I used and tested with some other students. So just 2 plans for the purposes of this class. You have other kinds of responsibilities to do, and I want to just to show me a sampling of how you would approach that. So you're going to use the plan that's on the format on the next pages and obviously in your assignment sheet. So I just threw some potential activities that I might brainstorm. Here they looked at different kinds of things in nature, and they're organizing and maybe charting or graphing it by color. A discovery table in science that I might do, relating art essentially with the nature faces. You could make a picture of yourself using different kinds of materials that they can touch and feel and use to represent themselves. The sorting parts of the flower really reflects science, and maybe actually that classification pieces of the skills in mathematics. So brainstorming through what it is you're going to represent. So recall before you were going to do your curriculum framework and do your brainstorming of just listing 3 activities on the different aspects that you've decided are important in your framework. So here's where you can go and pick 2 ideas that you had, and you're just going to develop them more thoroughly on the activity. So here we'll just look briefly at the format. It's very similar to lesson planning that you've done before in various classes or in your work, and so it's just taking this through. Again, the idea is thinking through from the beginning. Philosophy to goals to decision makings about frameworks that would tell how I'm organizing my curriculum, then branching off of that with the activities that I have within the schedule that I'm designing, and then looking particularly at a unit and how I'm going to organize learning in a meaningful way, decide what theme, what unit topic is valuable that I'm going to suggest. I'm going to use that from my list. And then I'm going to give these example activities that show how that connection goes from the beginning down to the end. And the final one that has the activity flow, just anticipatory procedures and closure. And of course, you can add your references and materials on that as well. So thinking through what it is in terms of the representative activities you want to do. So hopefully going through this will help give you some added information and clarifications about curriculum strands in particular, but get you to really think the purpose of the activity is really also reflecting on your decision making rather than thinking of great ideas, cute, interesting ideas, activities to do, really making it coherent from the beginning of the planning process and your beliefs and thinking that through all the way through to the activities that you design and how that reflects on your beliefs, practices, and your organization of your program. Have any questions? Please keep communicating and let me know.